When you think of Trump, you think of a politician who speaks his mind.
You call women you don't like fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals. Your Twitter account...
Only Rosie O'Donnell.
You also probably think of somebody who's very pro-economy, and that means favoring low interest rates. For one, low interest rates makes it easier for home buyers to get a loan. It also tends to push up asset prices, such as home prices. It is one of the few policies that benefits both sellers and buyers alike. Now that's all great, but what does that have to do with Donald Trump and his return? And is he really the one making the decisions? On the surface, Trump seems to favor low interest rates.
Unfortunately, they just raised interest rates a little bit. Personally think the Fed should drop rates. If we had a Fed that would lower interest rates. I want to congratulate the Federal Reserve. For starters, they've lowered the Fed rate. Well, I like to see low interest rates.
But his views on interest rates run a lot deeper than what meets the eye, and this is worrying. In this video, I'm going to paint a different picture. I'll show you why he isn't as honest as what appears to be, and why he isn't as supportive of low interest rates as what is seen on the media. It's been 8 years since he first took office in 2017, and from what I've seen, he's changed a lot, both in terms of his demeanor and his stance on interest rates. I won't be just giving you my hypothesis, but in this video, I'll be giving you real data and his real words. Then you can decide for yourself if he is as good for the property market as what everybody claims. In order to understand why I'm worried about Trump's second term, let's first look at his relationship with interest rates. Since he was a candidate back in 2016, he has been very vocal about interest rates.
When they raise interest rates, you're going to see some very bad things happen because the Fed is not doing their job.
Trump is a Republican, and Republicans are known for being pro-economy.
Read my lips. No new taxes.
So naturally, you would expect him to be in favor of lower rates.
But couldn't you then say if Trump gets elected, he's going to lower interest rates?
But this hasn't always been the case, as we will see. Over the years, he's changed his view on rates a few times. But before we get into this and why this is worrying, let's first look at why interest rates are so central to the economy and the property market, especially here in Singapore. If you're new here, my name is Daryl, and in this video we talk about real estate, so consider subscribing for more unbiased property videos. Low interest rates are good for the economy in two ways. Firstly, they help to push up asset prices. In order for companies to grow, expand, buy equipment, they need capital, or simply put, they need money. The lower these interest rates are, the less interest these companies will need to pay when borrowing money from the bank. And hence, they will be more willing to borrow money to grow. The more these companies expand, the more goods and services they provide, and the more jobs they end up eventually creating. That in turn means that more people receive salaries. As people get richer, they have more money to purchase homes and other assets, which then drives the prices up. The second way that low interest rates are important for the economy is through the ease of borrowing. Most of us, we need a home loan when purchasing a house. The lower these interest rates are, the less interest we need to pay when we take out this home loan. And that means the more we will be both willing and able to borrow when we buy an expensive house. Singapore is particularly unique in this case. We have this thing called the TDSR, or Total Debt Servicing Ratio. It is a government policy that dictates how much a bank can lend us. That means that the bank determines how much we can borrow based on the monthly installment as well as our own income. In simple terms, the lower the rates are, the lower our monthly installment is, and the larger the home loan we are allowed to take up, assuming a constant salary. But low interest rates are not always a good thing. Keep rates low for too long and you eventually have an inflation problem. This inflation problem would eventually make its way back to Singapore, as we saw during the COVID and Biden years. It is because of this inflation problem that I believe that Trump is not always able to walk his talk when it comes to maintaining low rates. So while he was indeed pushing the low interest rate narrative at the start, I question whether he was actually behaving the same way when he eventually became president, as the data paints a very different story. To understand why I'm worried, let's first look at the actual data and the actual interest rates during his first term from 2017 to 2021. The formal name for the US interest rates is the federal funds rate, and these rates are made public. During the period of Trump's first presidency, he was actually preaching for lower interest rates.
Well, I personally think the Fed should drop rates.
But you can see here that these rates actually went up quarter by quarter. Closer back home, in these few years, our HDB and condo prices actually remained relatively stagnant. So where did our property boom come from during the last few years if it didn't come from Trump's policies? Ironically, it came during the Joe Biden years, who actually was a Democrat. Now in the perfect world, the president actually has no control over interest rates. Rates are determined by the Federal Reserve, who does not fall under the purview of the president. However, the Federal Reserve chairman is appointed by the president himself, So you can't exactly say they are fully autonomous either. This so-called autonomy is one of the reasons why I believe that rates went up so much during Trump's first term. In fact, they went up so much that Trump even threatened to fire Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve.
You talked about removing him once.
I did because he was keeping the rates too high.
Yeah.
And I was right.
One way of looking at this is that the Fed is truly independent and went against Trump. This is worrying in one way. The other way of looking at this is that Trump had the Feds on a string and intentionally allowed rates to go up. This case is equally worrying as well. The fact here is that rates went up during Trump's first term. But the interest rates during his first term is only one of the reasons why I'm worried. The other reason is that his position on rates is starting to change, and it is starting to show. Inflation and low interest rates are two sides of the same coin. It's hard to have one without the other. For most of the years, Trump only talked about the low rates but completely ignored the piece on the inflation. This has changed a bit and it's not the case recently though. In a recent interview at the Economic Club after winning the election, he openly admitted to how low rates can cause runaway inflation. He also mentioned that rates were too low and he would not have done so himself.
In fact, he actually dropped them too much when I did this. And he dropped the hell out of the rates. He dropped them too much. He went so, he dropped them actually too much, okay.
However, we should also take this with a pinch of salt. Before taking office back in 2017, Trump also criticized Obama's policy, claiming that rates were too low and artificially propping up the economy.
They're going to be low till the end of the year. I don't think Obama, he wants to go out. I mean, shouldn't be working this way.
And Obama doesn't allow our Fed to raise interest rates. Because when those interest rates go, you watch what's going to happen. It's going to be very unattractive. He'll be out playing golf someplace. But you know what? They're wrong in what they're doing.
So his antics about saying that rates are too low is not new as well. But the fact that he is becoming more vocal again means that we should not take low rates as a given. But why wouldn't Trump want low rates if that made so many people happy? Let's talk about that. The answer here is that it is actually bad for the economy. In order for the US Federal Reserve to keep interest rates low, they need to do a very controversial act. And that act is printing money. While they don't actually print more money on paper, what they do is increase the amount of US dollars in circulation. They do this through what is known as open market operations. Without diving too much into the technicalities of how this is done, this is controversial because it allows the US government to create more US dollars and money out of thin air. It is essentially like a cheat code for the US government. The problem here is that when the US Federal Reserve creates more money out of thin air, you now have more dollars chasing the same quantity of assets. And that is why asset prices go up. It is not necessarily because these assets have become more valuable, but rather because these dollars have become less valuable. The increase of prices of goods is called inflation. Even though this money printing, low interest rates and inflation is taking place in the US, it eventually makes its way back home to our shores in Singapore. And that is why it is not surprising to me that we have so many million-dollar HGBs recently. In fact, the original definition of the word inflation used to mean the expansion of the money supply rather than the increase of prices of goods and services. But over the years, this definition got changed and one can only imagine it is to cover things up. Trump is known to use the stock market as a benchmark to his own performance.
The stock market, Dow Jones Industrial Average, just hit 30,000, which is the highest in history.
Printing money and keeping rates low is one way that the president can use to push the market to all-time highs. However, as we've seen, it is bad for the economy, and it is not something that the government can keep doing without consequences like inflation. That is why I believe that the situation is not as simple as it appears, and Trump is not always able to do what he says he will. And that touches another point, which is Trump's reliability as a politician. You could say that a good politician and a good strategist would not give his whole game plan away to the public. And I believe that Trump is no different. Recently, when asked how he would handle Iran's nuclear facilities, he mentioned that he couldn't share such information with the public.
It's a wonderful question, but how can am I going to do preemptive strikes? Why would I say that? Can you imagine if I said yes or no? You'd say...
On the surface, it may not seem like much, but such a calm, collected and measured response is a huge difference from how he used to confront the press in his first term.
Don't be rude. Don't be rude. No, I'm not going to give you a question. I'm not going to give you a question. You are fake news. Quiet, quiet, quiet.
So there is definitely something different about him this time. But anyway, this is worrying because his actions and his words don't always align. On the topic of rates, he is known to change his position depending on whether he's a candidate or the president. And this is worrying because you can never be sure how he's going to act. Furthermore, if I relied solely on his track record and past data, it will show that rates actually went up quite substantially during his first term. And this is worrying for both property buyers and sellers. Donald Trump is a president who's either hated or loved. So let me know, how do you think his presidency would affect our real estate market here in Singapore? And are you worried?